"She's nice," little boy told mafia boss, crying alone, then pointed at his mom across the park. It snowed heavily that evening. The wind was rough, pushing through coats and scarf layers like it wanted to remind the city it was still winter. Halton Park should have been empty by then. Most families had gone home after the choir show, the carousel lights dimmed, and the hot chocolate vendor had packed up. But one bench near the fountain had company. A man sat there, elbows on knees, hands bare in the cold. He wasn't moving. He wasn't checking his phone. He didn't even blink when a flurry passed straight into his face. A little boy in a white puffy jacket and red gloves stopped 5 feet in front of him, one cookie in hand, snow up to his boots. The man looked up, slow. Tattoos inked the backs of his fingers. His jaw looked tense, but his eyes had something missing. The boy tilted his head, then stepped closer. "You look sad," the boy said. The man didn't answer. "You want my mom?" The boy pointed across the grass to a woman sitting on the other side of the park, cup in hand, rubbing warmth into her legs. "She's nice," the boy added. "She reads all the words when I get sleepy, even the hard ones." The man blinked, then looked at the woman. She hadn't seen them yet. Millie, the boy, turned back to him and offered the half of his cookie. The man didn't reach for it, but he didn't look away either. A single street lamp buzzed on behind them. "Some people are sad because no one's around," Millie said like it was a fact. That's when the woman noticed. Her cup hit the bench as she stood, slow but firm. Her eyes scanned the space. Her steps were fast, but quiet. Her body moved between the man and her child in one motion, like it wasn't the first time she'd had to be a shield. "Is he bothering you, baby?" she asked, voice sharp. Millie grinned and pointed. "He's nice too. Just sad." The woman turned to the man, held his eyes. "If you're still here by 6, she said calmly, "you're welcome at dinner." Then she took Millie's hand and walked off. The man didn't smile. He didn't call after her. But he watched them the entire way out of the park, snow clinging to his lashes like it had a right to stay. He didn't move for a long time after they left. Their footsteps faded, the sound of the little boy's laugh bouncing once off the iron fence before vanishing completely. Rafe sat still, hands clasped between his knees, breathing through the cold that bit under his collar. It had been years since anyone spoke to him without fear, even longer since someone invited him anywhere without an agenda. The words stayed with him. "If you're still here by 6. That was 24 minutes from now. Rafe didn't look at his watch. He didn't need to. His mind could mark time better than any clock. He had once measured years in betrayals, in moves on a chessboard where everyone smiled and shook hands until they didn't. But this was something different. A mother, a child, a sentence without strategy. And yet, it pulled harder than any demand Vika had ever made. Snow crunched to his right. A small dog barked from somewhere in the distance. He scanned the park without turning his head. Clear. No watchers. No vehicles waiting at the curb. No echo of footsteps behind him. Still, his muscles stayed locked. He stood up slowly, the bench creaking behind him. His knees stiffened from the cold. The cookie his hands never touched was still on the ground where the boy had dropped it. He looked at it, then left it there. 23 minutes. He took the long way out of the park. His car was parked 2 streets over, unmarked, windows fogged. He didn't check it, just passed it and kept walking, as if the cold could help sort the question pounding in his chest louder than any gunshot ever had. What would it mean to show up? He didn't go back to the estate, didn't call Vika. He stopped at a Comer store, bought nothing. At 5:59, he stood across the street from the small brick church. Lights were on inside. Music played low. Through the frosted window, he saw movement. Then a little hand hit the glass from inside. The boy, Millie, grinned. He pointed and waved. Rafe Loriani crossed the street. The door creaked open at 6:04. Every head in the room turned to him, except hers. She just pointed to the seat beside her. Warm air hit him first. It carried the smell of spiced cider, roasted vegetables, and the soft mix of perfume and winter jackets crowded near a buffetable. Rafe paused at the doorway, snow melting into the collar of his coat. Conversations dimmed. A few people stepped back without meaning to. A chair scraped, a baby fussed. But Naomi didn't look at him with fear. She just lifted her chin in a steady way, then pointed to an open seat next to her son, like she'd been expecting him. Millie kicked his legs under the table. "You made it," he whispered loudly. Rafe didn't answer, just nodded once and sat. The chair felt small compared to his frame, the table too close, the lights too warm. He wasn't built for places like this. He wasn't used to families passing napkins around or little kids reaching for extra bread like it was nothing. He felt eyes on him, quiet but heavy. The kind that tried to place him, tried to recall if they'd seen his face on a headline or heard rumors with his name attached. He didn't turn. He didn't give them room to stare. Naomi slid a mug toward him. "Cider or water?" she asked. He pointed at the cider. Her fingers brushed the cup as she pushed it closer. No flinch, no hesitation. It had been years since someone touched something near him without shaking. He took a sip. Sweet, hot. It burned down his throat and settled somewhere that wasn't pain. Naomi moved around the table, helping untie a scarf from an elderly man cutting a chicken. Piece for a teen girl with cold fingers, handing out napkins, adjusting chairs. She didn't treat this as a church dinner. She treated it like everyone in the room mattered. Rafe watched her without meaning to. She wasn't dressed for attention. Her coat had a sewn patch near the elbow. Her shoes looked worn. But her presence held the room together in a way that made people breathe easier. Millie tugged his sleeve. "You don't smile a lot, huh?" Rafe blinked once. "Not much. My mom says smiling helps your heart." Rafe's jaw tightened. If that were true, his heart would have collapsed years ago. Naomi returned to the table and set a plate in front of him. "Eat," she said plainly. "Warm food helps on cold days." He looked at the plate, then at her. Something shifted he couldn't explain. A gust of wind hit the church doors, shaking them hard. Naomi's eyes lifted first. Rafe's hand dropped instinctively under the table. Before anyone could react, the front doors slammed again. This time, it wasn't the wind. Rafe's hand slipped under the table where his coat rested. Naomi didn't miss it. Her body went still, but her expression didn't shift. She walked toward the door without pause. A latecomer, a teenager with a red hoodie and earbuds, fumbled through the entrance. He looked up, startled by the attention, and mumbled, "Sorry." Naomi smiled, patted his shoulder, then guided him to the back. Rafe's hand left the coat. Millie giggled. "You were about to karate chop the cookies." He glanced down at the boy, then across the table to Naomi, who was already back, checking a tray of food like nothing happened. He sat back, slowly, tension still low in his shoulders. "You get like that often?" she asked, not looking at him. "Depends who's watching the door," he said. She gave a quiet, then turned her focus to the tray. Rafe picked up a fork. The food was warm. The rice, fluffy. Chicken glazed. Real food. He hadn't tasted anything like this in weeks. He wasn't even sure what his last real meal had been. Maybe something catered, cold, eaten alone. He took another bite. People were talking around him now, laughing, passing rolls, humming along to the Christmas music playing through old speakers on the wall. But no one looked at him anymore. Like he belonged. He didn't understand why that was more disarming than all the fear he'd ever seen. Naomi sat beside him again. "We don't care about names in here," she said. "We care about how you show up." He nodded once, not trusting his voice. Millie climbed onto Naomi's lap. "I told you he'd come." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You bribed him with cookies." Rafe let a quiet breath escape through his nose. Almost a laugh. Almost. Millie leaned close to whisper something in Naomi's ear. Naomi smiled. Then she looked back at Rafe. "One dinner doesn't fix sadness, but it reminds you you're still human." He met her eyes. The sound of the choir kids rehearsing floated in from the hall. The moment slowed. But then Naomi stood. "Excuse me," she said. One of the boys just wiped his nose on the table. Rafe looked down at his plate again. But what caught his eye wasn't food. It was the edge of a photo. poking from Naomi's open tote bag. Naomi's back ached before she even reached the end of the hallway. The church had been warm all night, but her body still carried the cold from standing outside too long earlier. She'd cleaned the last of the trays, restocked the snack bins for the morning shift, and now stood barefoot in the quiet hallway, massaging her neck with one hand while holding Millie's damp sweater in the other. The folding table leaned slightly to one side. She adjusted it. Nothing about this place was perfect. The lighting buzzed in the back hallway. The hot water worked most of the time. But this church, this beat-up corner brick with a short steeple, was where they came to feel full again. Tonight, they served 37 plates. Only 2 were left uneaten. Her fingers rubbed against the scratchy edge of a napkin in her pocket, still folded, from when Millie stuffed it there just in case the man needed a clean one. That man hadn't said much, but he'd come at exactly 6:04. He didn't speak when he entered, just looked around with that same unreadable expression and walked straight toward the seat Millie had claimed for him. Naomi was the only one who greeted him. She didn't say his name because she didn't know it, and that didn't bother her. She hadn't asked names for a while now. Names came with stories, and sometimes stories asked too much. Now the room was empty. Millie had fallen asleep on one of the nursery cots. The other volunteers had gone home. Naomi stood in the kitchen doorway, half drained, waiting for the second round of heat to kick in. She pulled her phone from her back pocket. 3 messages from her supervisor at the daycare, 1 from her brother, late again of course, and a picture Millie must have taken, her own fingers blurry in the frame, reaching for a cookie. Naomi smiled. Then she heard a creak. The front door eased open. She turned. The same man, quiet, still snow-dusted, stood in the doorway again. She glanced at the clock. 6:04. She didn't speak, just leaned her elbow against the doorway and waited. He stepped inside, shook the snow from his coat, and scanned the empty room like he needed to confirm it was safe. His hands weren't in his pockets. His coat wasn't zipped. But Naomi still noticed something different, something alert. "Millie's asleep," she said. He nodded once. "She left you a candy cane," Naomi added, pulling it from her apron and holding it out. He hesitated, then took it. It stayed unopened in his hand. Naomi turned and walked into the kitchen without another word. He followed, 2 steps behind, boots quiet on the tile. She poured water into a mug and handed it to him. "Microwave's busted," she said. "It's warm, not hot." He drank it anyway. Silence sat heavy between them. Naomi leaned against the fridge and looked at him fully this time. His jawline was strong, but not for show. His coat wasn't new, but the stitching near the collar had been done by someone who cared. He had the kind of presence that took up a room without meaning to. "You military?" she asked, folding her arms. He shook his head. "Then how do you walk like that?" He looked at her. "You think I walk a certain way? I think you walk like someone who's carried things too heavy, too far." That made him pause. Naomi pushed off the fridge and grabbed a cloth. "The back pews need wiping." He took the cloth without hesitation. She followed behind, watching him. He wiped each pew like it mattered. No rush, no cutting corners, just straight lines and clean effort. The kind of work a man does when he's used to doing worse. "You hungry?" she asked. "I'm here," he replied. She understood what that meant. She made him a plate. Didn't ask if he wanted it. Just made it. Rice, baked beans, leftover turkey she'd kept warm in the oven. She handed it to him like it was normal to feed strangers at night. He sat. Ate. No sound but the ticking clock on the wall and the heat vent rattling to life behind them. Naomi didn't sit beside him. She sat across. Outside, a black car rolled to a slow stop near the edge of the lot. Headlights off. Engine still running. Naomi noticed the car. It didn't park. It hovered near the curb, engine humming low. No one got out. No windows rolled down. Just a presence, parked where streetlights didn't reach. She didn't flinch. Didn't draw attention to it. She stood and walked toward the front windows like she was checking the snow buildup. The curtain stayed in her hand a second longer than it needed to. She counted 2 shapes inside the car. The man across the table didn't look up, but she knew he saw it too. His fork paused mid-air. His eyes didn't move, but his body shifted slightly, just enough to put his back against the wall. Quiet instinct. Naomi returned to the table and sat again. "Friends of yours?" she asked casually. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. They sat there, quiet, while the car idled. Then, finally, it pulled away. He exhaled through his nose. "You didn't ask who I am," he said. Naomi met his eyes. "People tell you when they're ready." He looked at her for a long time. Most people couldn't hold his stare for that long. But she didn't blink. "You don't know me," he said. She nodded. "That's the point." He looked down at the plate, now mostly empty. "You ever wonder what makes someone stop showing up in their own life?" Naomi leaned forward on her elbows. "Every day. Then I remember, showing up again starts with small things, like wiping pews, or finishing a plate." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he took the last bite. Millie's voice broke the quiet from the back hallway. "Mommy?" Naomi stood instantly, already heading toward her. Rafe watched her go. When she returned, Millie was half asleep on her shoulder. She settled him on the couch by the wall, covered him with her coat, and kissed the side of his curls. Then she turned back to Rafe. "That's my everything," she said. "You protect him. Or you. Leave." Rafe nodded once. The heat kicked up again. Something loosened in his chest. "I'll go," he said, standing. Naomi raised a brow. "You don't have to." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm staying." He picked up his plate, carried it to the sink, and rinsed it quietly. Naomi watched him like she was trying to read a book with no title. As he dried his hands, his fingers brushed something in his pocket. Slowly, he pulled it out. A worn name tag with an old photo and one word across the top, Loriani. He stared at the name tag like it had teeth. The photo was faded. His eyes in it were colder, his jaw tighter. The name printed in bold above the barcode didn't belong in this room, not. With Millie asleep on a couch and warm food still steaming in the sink, Naomi noticed it, not the name. The shift in him, how his hand hovered longer than necessary, how he didn't slip it back into his coat right away. She didn't speak, just leaned on the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. "Loriani," she said quietly, reading it aloud. He didn't confirm or deny it. Her voice didn't change. "That name's been on headlines, downtown court files. A few whispered stories I've heard people lie about." He slipped the tag back into his coat pocket, calm. "Do you need me to leave?" he asked. She shook her head. "I need you to decide what you're doing here. Not with us. With yourself." He looked at her then. Fully. "I buried someone 2 nights ago. Someone who never stopped praying I'd turn into a better man. Someone who believed I still could." Naomi walked slowly back to the sink, ran hot water over the dishes he'd left. "You don't need to explain to me," she said. "But don't insult your mother's prayers by hiding behind silence." His eyes didn't leave her. He dealt with district attorneys who flinched, boardroom snakes who smiled too easily, men with muscles but no spine. This woman, wiping plates under flickering lights, spoke to him like power didn't move her, like fear didn't either. "You still serving tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "Every night until Christmas." He nodded back slowly. "Then I'll be here." Naomi dried her hands. "Good." She didn't ask more. Millie mumbled something in his sleep. Naomi went to him, rubbed his back gently. Rafe watched her hands, strong, worn, steady. He didn't remember the last time he'd seen hands like that, or trusted them. He pulled his coat on, reached the door, then turned back. "I'm not proud of the name," he said, "but I'm not running from it anymore." Naomi looked at him. "Don't run," she said. "Walk it back." Quietly, he stepped outside. The wind bit his face again, but it didn't sting this time. Across the street, parked low in the dark, Vika Lorne closed her binoculars and smirked. "So, she doesn't know who you are yet. Good." The Loriani estate used to be loud. Laughter in the hallway. Heels on the marble. His mother's voice echoing in 2 languages. That house had once held life. Rafe walked through the main hallway with his gloves in his coat pocket and his heart locked behind his ribs. The portraits were still on the walls. Her favorite chair still had the old shawl thrown across the armrest, but the scent of lavender was gone, replaced by something sterile. He reached her bedroom. Someone had boxed up her things. Not him. The closet doors were cracked open, almost like they'd been searched. Her jewelry chest sat too clean on the dresser. No dust. He opened it. Empty. Behind him, footsteps didn't creak. They clicked. Vika stood in the doorway in pearl heels and a slate-gray blouse, smiling like she hadn't stolen time. "You missed the funeral," she said softly. "Rafe didn't turn. You buried her before I was told she was sick. She went quickly. You planned it quicker." Vika walked in like she owned the floors. "I told the staff to be respectful. I thought you'd show. Soon are. You made sure I wouldn't." She stopped beside the dresser, opened a drawer, pulled out a folded scarf. "Don't start blaming me because you lost track of what mattered," she said, draping the scarf across her wrist like an accessory. "You chose distance." "No," Rafe replied. "I chose peace." He turned toward her, eyes calm. "You built a kingdom with fake signatures and forged hands, and when she got sick, you didn't call. You calculated." "She was weak," Vika snapped. "Sentimental, soft. We needed clean lines. She clung to people. That made her vulnerable." Rafe stared hard. "She was my mother." Vika smiled again. "And I protected the family name. You protected your access." Silence followed. She dropped the scarf back in the drawer like it was infected. "So now what? You gonna come back? Take the house? Call the lawyers?" Rafe stepped past her, slow. "No. You already made your moves." He left without slamming a door. Didn't speak to a single guard. Didn't sit in the driver's seat. He walked out of the house and didn't look back. By the next morning, Rafe Loriani was gone from every place he used to belong. His name was removed from 5 estate operations. 3 lawyers received silent withdrawals. Every private number that once rang his line hit dead air. Vika didn't know it yet, but her audience had vanished. Rafe didn't care about the thrones they used to fight over. He cared about what was buried in the quiet, what she'd touched that she had no right to. The graveyard wasn't marked. It was a patch of land beside a white chapel in the outer county. No Loriani plaque. No marble. Just one wild rosebush in the frost, bending with the weight of snow. He stood there with his gloves in his hand, not on, and his coat collar lifted to fight the wind. No driver waited. No suit, just Rafe, alone, with no words for the ground. He stayed for 16 minutes, said nothing, then left a single thing behind, a gold bracelet his mother used to wear to breakfast every Sunday. He laid it in the snow, walked away before it sank. That night, Halton Park was still iced over, but he showed up earlier, before Millie and Naomi. This time he sat for a while, just watching. Then he stood, walked to the bench where he'd first been approached by a boy with a cookie and no fear. He pulled a paper bag from his coat, set it on the bench. Inside, a pair of small, brand-new children's gloves. Next to it, he placed a steaming paper cup of cocoa he'd picked up from a local corner shop. Then he disappeared down the side path, cutting through the alley behind the school. When Naomi and Millie arrived 20 minutes later, Millie spotted the bag first. "Mommy, look." Naomi approached slowly, checked the area. Her body instinctively shifted in front of her son again. She touched the cup. Still warm. She checked the gloves. It was brand new. Millie pulled the gloves on. "He remembered my hands were cold." Naomi looked around the park. Nothing but the slow turn of the carousel lights. But her breath hitched just slightly. Because this wasn't random. Someone had been watching. Later that evening, as Naomi locked the supply room at the church, she found a white envelope slipped under the door. No name, no return address. Inside, a single stamp marked "Paid in full." Naomi didn't open it right away. The envelope felt off. Too clean, too flat, too precise. Like it hadn't passed through the usual channels of smudged fingerprints and creased edges. She turned it over in her hand. No handwriting. No postage mark, just a red stamp on the seal, paid in full. She stood alone in the hallway, the church quiet behind her. The last of the volunteers had already left. Millie was asleep in the nursery again, snuggled under a quilt donated by the retired teacher 2 blocks over. Naomi had seen a lot in her life. Bills with red warnings, envelopes with no return address, promises that never kept their shape. But this had weight. She opened it carefully. Inside was a thin stack of documents, clean copies. A printout from the city utilities board, the church's gas and electric accounts, both zeroed out. Her fingers tightened around the paper. They'd been behind for 4 months. She'd kept the space heaters going in the back rooms and told the volunteers the hallway chill was just old pipes. She'd collected coins from her center shift to cover candles for the next service. Now, not only was the debt cleared, it was paid through March. She stepped into the back kitchen, grabbed her phone, and called Pastor Dre. He answered on the second ring. "Did you take care of the utility bills?" There was a pause. "I was about to ask you the same," he said. "Someone beat us to it." Naomi's voice dropped. "Did they say who?" "No, just a wire transfer. It came from a clean holding account. I looked, it's all legit." Her hand dropped to her side as the paper fluttered against her jeans. "I'll call you tomorrow," she murmured. She ended the call and leaned against the cabinet. Thought. Someone was moving pieces around her life. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the candy cane from last night, the one Millie insisted they save for the nice man. She looked at it, then back at the envelope. The heat in the church suddenly felt warmer, like someone had opened a door she hadn't seen. Out the window, across the street, the same Comer store flickered its sign, but this time Naomi saw him, Rafe, standing still, watching. Then he turned and walked away. Before she could blink. The next morning, Naomi left the house 15 minutes earlier than usual. She didn't say anything to Millie about it. She packed the lunch bag the same way, walked to the bus stop the same path. But her eyes were sharper. She scanned corners, checked parked cars, glanced through store windows. Nothing. No sign of the man with the coat and the stillness. But she could feel it, someone was checking in before she ever arrived. At the church, the front doormat had been shifted. Not much, just a half-inch to the right. She always straightened it when locking up. It had been placed with care. Inside, the hallway lights worked again. For 3 weeks they had flickered. The pastor had promised to look at it. Now they glowed steady, like someone had replaced the old bulbs while no one was watching. Naomi stopped by the boiler room out of instinct. The lock had been oiled. Smooth turn, no squeak. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she went about her day with more questions than answers. At lunch, she found an anonymous donation envelope in the mailbox. Crisp bills, no name. That night, while cleaning the coffee corner, she found a box of brand, new filters, restocked. No one on staff claimed it. By Thursday, the thrift store where she worked part-time called her in for a meeting. She expected her hours to be cut again. Instead, the manager said her position had been reevaluated. Her hourly wage had increased. She walked home in a cold wind with too many signs and no clear path to follow. That evening, Millie was coloring on the kitchen floor while Naomi folded towels. "Mommy," he said, not looking up. "Yeah, baby? Do you think someone watches you to make sure you don't fall down?" Naomi blinked. "What do you mean?" Millie shrugged. "Just, maybe someone watches to help. Like when you help people." Naomi's heart thudded once, deep. She knelt beside him. "Did someone tell you that?" "Nope." He held up a drawing. "I just feel it." In the picture, he'd drawn her and a tall man in a black coat, standing beside her, always close, but never touching. Naomi walked into the church kitchen later that night and froze. On the counter was another envelope, this time with her name handwritten across the front. The wrench clicked once, then again. Rafe tightened the pipe under the sink with slow, careful turns. Cold water dripped beside his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. His coat lay folded on a clean table nearby, sleeves still damp from the walk-in. It was past midnight, the church dark except for the flickering light above the storage hallway. He didn't ask for tools, He brought his own. The church's pipes had been leaking for weeks. Naomi had mentioned it once, offhand, between wiping tables and watching over Millie. Rafe remembered. Now he moved quietly, methodically, checking each connection, replacing old washers. He didn't leave a mess. Didn't write a note. Just finished the job. No one saw him arrive. No one would see him leave. By the time the sun touched the cross outside, the sink no longer groaned when turned. The rust was gone from the faucet. And the next envelope appeared. This time, filled with grocery store vouchers and a prepaid gas card. Naomi found it tucked inside the church's donation drawer. No note, no receipt, just a pattern beginning to form. She didn't speak on it. But she watched closer now. That afternoon, Pastor Dre mentioned the rent for the church building had been quietly adjusted. Anonymous donor, he said, scratching his head. The landlord said a third party handled it, legal, sealed, but odd. Naomi didn't say anything, just folded the tablecloth tighter and nodded. Then the thrift store restocked, items no one remembered tagging. A full coat rack of warm jackets appeared overnight, all sorted, all folded, all sized. Rafe was never seen dropping anything off. But by the fourth day, Naomi noticed something she hadn't before. He always arrived when no one was watching. He left nothing with his name, only pieces of problems fixed. She began to suspect long before she had proof. And the way Millie beamed when Rafe appeared near the church steps, like he'd never been gone at all, that sealed it. "Did you come back to sit?" Millie asked one morning. "No," Rafe said, crouching to his level. "Came back to see if your fingers are still warm." Millie giggled and held up both hands. "Still warm." Naomi leaned against the doorway as Rafe handed Millie a folded napkin shaped like a bird. It wasn't perfect, but it made the boy laugh so hard he dropped the spoon he was holding. "Where'd you learn that?" she asked Rafe quietly, arms crossed. "Someone taught me a long time ago." "Someone with kids?" "No, just someone patient." She studied him. "You strike me as someone who didn't grow up with much softness." He didn't look at her when he replied, "I didn't." She stepped into the room, picked up Millie's spoon, and rinsed it at the sink Rafe had fixed days ago. "You've been around the church a lot lately," she said. "I'm quiet," he replied. "Quiet doesn't make you invisible." He tilted his head. "Do I bother you?" "No," Naomi said honestly. "I'm just trying to figure out what makes a man like you care about leaky pipes and coat racks." Rafe sat back in his chair. "You care about things most people ignore. That kind of effort deserves backup." Naomi dried her hands. "Is that what this is to you? Backup? Not everything has to be complicated." She smiled tightly. Says the man who won't give a straight answer to save his life. Millie interrupted by placing 2 plastic cups on the table. "We're having a party," he announced. "You're both invited." Rafe looked at Naomi. "Guess we've been drafted." She sighed and sat down. "Fine, but I'm not drinking fake tea again." Millie leaned close and whispered, "It's invisible juice today." Naomi laughed. It surprised even her. She looked at Rafe. His body was still, but his face had softened. His eyes weren't tired, they were watching. Focused, present. He wasn't trying to be anything here. He just was. That unsettled her more than she expected. Later, when Millie left to color, Naomi stayed seated. "You always ask questions about him," she said. "You never ask about me. You're not the one I worry about. You don't know us. I know enough to know he feels safe around you. And I trust what he feels." Naomi's voice lowered. "What are you trying to fix?" Rafe looked her straight in the eye. "Not fix. Protect." That word settled hard between them. Naomi stepped into the classroom that evening to erase the chalkboard. One message had been added in unfamiliar handwriting. "Tell her she saved a king." The words stopped her hand mid-swipe. Naomi stared at the message, chalk still fresh, angled slightly left. The line wasn't signed. No flourish, just a sentence sitting in the corner of the board, quiet and strange. "Tell her she saved a king." Her eyes scanned the room. Chairs stacked, Bibles aligned, craft supplies tucked back into the bin. No one else had keys to this room after hours. She stepped back, cloth still in hand, heartbeat picking up speed, not from fear but recognition. Someone was watching her efforts, someone who knew more than they were saying. She didn't erase the message. Instead, she stepped out, closed the classroom door gently, and made her way to the fellowship hall. Pastor Dre was boxing up leftover canned goods. "You notice anything unusual in the classroom?" He paused. "You mean other than all the glitter from last night's angel project?" Naomi gave a tight smile. "Never mind." She walked back toward the front office and paused at the window. Outside, the same bench in Halton Park sat quiet, but something was different again. On the bench, a new thermos, a folded children's scarf, a paperback book about bedtime prayers. She exhaled. Rafe had been dropping breadcrumbs, not to impress, not to be seen. He was trying to belong without forcing the door open. Naomi returned inside, sat at the front pew, and looked at the paper still in her apron from the night before. The envelope with her name now carried a second folded note behind the vouchers. One line, "If it stays warm in here, maybe the cold stays out of you too." She swallowed. This wasn't someone running game. This was someone rebuilding something he thought he'd never have. She stood up, heart heavier now. Not from fear, but from knowing exactly what it meant when broken people chose to serve instead of hide. Rafe didn't ask for space. He made room for others first. Outside, across the street, Rafe stood beneath the edge of the broken streetlight. As she locked the door, he didn't wave. Just watched, waited, and then slowly turned to walk the long way around the block, his shadow trailing behind him. The next morning, Naomi stood in the center hallway with a fresh set of donation logs in one hand and an old ledger in the other. She didn't usually play detective, but the patterns were impossible to ignore now. Every envelope came without fingerprints. Every act of service was done off the clock. And every gift, be it hot cocoa, plumbing repairs, or anonymous church payments, landed the same way. Right before Rafe appeared, she stepped into the office, opened the desk drawer, and pulled out last winter's budget plan. She flipped through the files. Heating costs, facility repair quotes, volunteer stipends. All of it. Resolved. In the last 6 days, every pressing issue that had hung over her head was checked off, not with fanfare, but with invisible help. She didn't need to guess anymore. She folded the files shut and pressed her hands against the desk, letting herself feel what she couldn't say out loud. Rafe had been watching her carry everything, and he decided not to take the weight from her hands, but to make the road a little more walkable. That afternoon, when he showed up early again, Naomi didn't act surprised. She handed him a pair of gloves Millie had outgrown. He raised an eyebrow. "For when you're working under the sink next time," she said. He accepted them without speaking. Later, she caught him adjusting the crooked coat rack in the church's back hallway. Not with nails, but with 2 small screws he'd clearly brought with him. "Is that all you do?" she asked from behind him. He turned, not startled. "Fix things?" "No," she said, walking closer. "Show up in pieces, leave things better, and still keep your mouth shut." He gave a small shrug. "People talk too much." Naomi stood still, and people hide more than that. He met her gaze. "Millie makes you soft, but I know you weren't always this calm." She nodded. "Life roughs you out." He smooths me back. Rafe's expression didn't change. "You're raising a whole person. You don't get enough credit." "I'm not here for credit. You should be." Naomi stepped closer. "Why do you keep coming back?" Rafe didn't hesitate. "Because you didn't ask me to." That evening, as Naomi locked the church for the night, she passed the classroom again. A second line had been added beneath the chalk message. She didn't just save a king, she made him human again. Vika Lorne's nails cracked the surface of her desk as she stabbed her thumb into the calculator again. 3 of her shadow accounts were frozen. 2 properties under her trust had been reassigned. And the third, an estate once slated for philanthropic conversion, now had a pending legal block from a firm she'd never even heard of. She tapped the glass again. The screen didn't stutter. She slid the documents off her desk and stood up. "You arrogant ghost," she muttered. She crossed the room to her liquor cabinet, ignoring the chilled flutes. meant for guests, and poured straight bourbon into a short glass. It bit harder than usual. He hadn't returned her calls, hadn't stepped foot in the estate again, but he'd returned to the city. She felt it the way predators feel their own breathing near tall grass. He wasn't reclaiming what was his. He was erasing her from what she built. And Rafe Loriani never made a move without meaning. Vika's assistant tapped on the door. The account manager from Blackwell's just called. Another signature flag. Vika set the glass down slowly. Same pattern? Yes, ma'am. Transferred under silent rights. No traceable ID. Same firm filed the restriction as the one who blocked the foundation assets last week. She closed her eyes. And still no trail. No, ma'am. Except... The assistant hesitated. Vika turned her head sharply. We saw new wire activity, smaller transactions, toward a church property in Halton. Vika blinked once. A church? Correct. And a thrift store. Both within walking distance of... I know where they are, Vika snapped. The assistant placed a small printout on her desk. A photo, grainy. Taken from a distance, but the face was clear. A woman standing just outside the church building, carrying a lunchbox, adjusting a child's hat. Her expression wasn't scared. It was grounded, unshaken. She doesn't know who he is, Vika said quietly, tapping the photo. Not really. No, ma'am. Vika leaned closer, fingers curling slowly. Then she's not protecting him. Yet. Good. Vika dropped the photo onto her desk like it was something sour. She walked to the edge of the window, heels tapping a rhythm only she understood. Outside, the city ran on time and desperation, both of which she'd mastered. But this quiet disruption Rafe was orchestrating in back alleys and community halls, it wasn't business anymore. It was personal, which was worse. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old file. It was thin, almost forgotten. Inside, a single paper marked Naomi Elias, a basic city profile, single mother, no criminal record, part-time employee, local volunteer, plain, dull, clean. But here she was, somehow close enough to shift Rafe's entire center of gravity. Vika's lips curled. Of all the women you could have crumbled for, she muttered, you chose a babysitter. She remembered the old days, when Rafe never let anyone too close, when even trusted captains were kept at arm's length, when loyalty had to be proven with something more than kindness. Vika had seen blood prove more love than words ever could. She'd been at his side when he shut doors on the family's enemies, when he took their empire from a tangled mess of reckless men and forced it into a thing of clean deals and dit silent rule. He'd owed her. He still did. And now, he was protecting a woman who didn't even know the world she'd been pulled into. Vika turned to the corner of the room. Two men in black coats stood waiting. No expressions, no names spoken. She slid the photo toward them. I want her brought in. One of them hesitated. Rafe's still active in that part of town. She smiled slowly. I know. That's why you'll move quiet. She stepped toward them, voice cold and sharp. He's not the only one who knows how to stay. Unsee. The man nodded once. And the child? Leave him. She'll come faster if she's alone. She dismissed them with a flick of her hand. The door shut softly behind them. Vika returned to her glass and downed what was left, then whispered to no one. Let's see how strong she is when she realizes fairy tales aren't free. Later that evening, Naomi stepped out of the center alone. Snowflakes touched her shoulders as she locked the gate. A voice behind her said calmly, Naomi. Elias? She turned. Two men stood by a black SUV, doors open, waiting. Naomi didn't answer right away. Her grip on the gate tightened as she looked at the men. Suits too clean for the neighborhood. Shoes too dry for the snow. Covered sidewalk. One stood near the SUV's rear door, hand resting against it like it was routine. The other had his hands tucked calmly in his coat pockets, but everything about him screamed control. We're not here to cause a scene, the one in front said. Someone would like to speak with you. She glanced back toward the church. Its stained glass caught the last of the day's light, but no one was around. "I didn't ask for a conversation," Naomi replied. The man nodded, almost with respect. "No, ma'am." "But she insists." "She?" Before Naomi could ask, the rear door of the SUV opened, and Vika Lorne stepped out, wearing fur, eyes like ice, smile like venom dipped in sugar. Naomi blinked once, steady. "You're the one behind the envelopes," she said slowly. Vika tilted her head. "If I was, would that make you grateful? Or just suspicious?" "I'm already both." Vika's smile widened. "You've got nerve," she said, stepping closer. "I'll give you that. But nerve can't carry a man like Rafe. Not for long." Naomi didn't move. "I didn't ask to carry him." "No," Vika said, voice sharp now. "You just sat beside him long enough for him to forget where he came from." Naomi studied her. "Is that what scares you? That he's forgetting you?" The guards shifted slightly. Vika raised a hand, keeping them. "Still, you don't understand how deep he's in, what he's done, what he's ruined. I helped build the wall around his name. I buried people to keep it intact." "I don't care about his name," Naomi said calmly. "I care about who shows up at the church when no one's looking." "That," Vika hissed, "is exactly what makes you dangerous." Snow began to fall harder now. It gathered on Vika's lashes but didn't soften her tone. "You think you've made him better. What you've done is made him weak." "No," Naomi replied. "I've made him real." Vika's smile vanished. She stepped closer. "You don't belong in his world." Naomi's jaw set. "And maybe his world doesn't belong in mine." A voice echoed from the shadows near the alley. "Step away from her." Vika froze. Naomi turned slowly. Rafe stood there, no coat, no backup, eyes locked on Vika. And this time he looked ready. The snowfall didn't seem to touch him. Rafe stepped forward, slow, controlled, like every inch of pavement between them had already been claimed. His sleeves were rolled, jaw locked, and the wind hit his back like it didn't dare push. Vika didn't blink, but her guards did. She turned slightly, chin high. "You're slipping, Rafe. You used to clean problems quietly. Now you chase after them in church parking lots." He stopped beside Naomi without looking at her. His voice stayed even. "You sent men to bring her in. That's not a problem. That's a mistake." Vika laughed once. "Short, cold. She doesn't belong next to you." "She's not next to me," he said. "She's walking her own lane. You're the one who stepped in it." Naomi said nothing. She didn't need to. Rafe's presence changed the air. The guards stiffened, unsure now. They weren't here for a fight. They were here to deliver a message. But the message had been returned, louder. Vika narrowed her eyes. "You think she knows who you are? What you've done? She knows enough. And when she finds out the rest, she'll still look me in the eye." Vika stepped forward, trying to close the gap, but Rafe didn't flinch. "You think you're building something real here?" she asked. "This little charity act, this woman, this child. You're pretending like you're someone else." Rafe finally moved just a step. "But enough. They're not pretending," he said quietly. "You are." The guards moved slightly, instinct twitching. But Vika raised her hand again. "You were better when you were mine," she said through clenched teeth. "I was never yours," he said. "I was just too numb to notice." Vika's face cracked. The Polish faded, just for a second. Then she stepped back toward the SUV, adjusting her coat like it had betrayed her. "You're going to regret walking away from power," she snapped. "I didn't," Rafe replied. "I just learned power doesn't always need to destroy something to prove it's real." She climbed into the vehicle, slammed the door, and the SUV pulled off without another word. Naomi stood in the snow, watching the street empty. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," Rafe replied. "But I wanted to." Naomi looked up at him. "You're not going back to who you were, are you?" Rafe didn't answer, because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure. Naomi stood still, snow brushing her coat as the black SUV rolled to a slow, deliberate stop in the alley's mouth. The back door opened, and Vika Lome stepped down. "No fur coat tonight," Just a steel, gray jacket, hair pulled back, boots polished and cold. Her heels clicked once on the pavement before she stood fully upright. "You've been making noise in places you don't understand," Vika said, folding her gloved hands together. Naomi didn't move. "I didn't realize church kitchens were your territory." "They weren't," Vika said with a light shrug, "until he started washing dishes in them." She stepped closer. "You think Rafe's interested in soup kitchens and thrift stores? He's not. He's pretending. And you're the distraction helping him do it." Naomi's voice stayed level. "I think you're scared. That's why you're out here talking to me instead of talking to him." Vika's eyes narrowed. "You think he's changed? You think he's found something real with you?" Naomi held a firm gaze. "He has," Vika scoffed. "You're a passing moment. You'll be the story he tells himself until he remembers who he is. And by then, you'll either be on the floor or out of the picture." Naomi raised her chin. "I'm not scared of you," she said plainly. "You lead with noise. But people like Rafe, they follow silence." That pulled something sharp across Vika's face. She stepped even closer. "You're wearing his attention like armor," she whispered. "But I've seen him rip people apart with the same eyes he now gives you." Naomi didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to change him. I'm just showing him he didn't have to disappear to be whole." Vika's jaw twitched. The wind kicked up, blowing between them. Naomi looked past her, calmly. "Is this the part where you threaten me?" Vika leaned in, voice low. "No, I don't need to threaten you. I just want you to understand when he finally chooses who he is, you won't survive it." The snow thickened, but Naomi didn't move. She held Vika's gaze the way you hold a lit match, calm, careful, unshaken. "You think I don't know pain?" Naomi said, voice even. "You think I haven't been left, lied to, walked through rooms where people only saw my struggle and not my worth?" Vika tilted her head, intrigued. "I've watched doors close. I've had to work twice as hard for half the help. So no, I'm not fragile. And no, I'm not temporary." Vika stepped closer until they were face to face. "He'll remember who built the walls. He'll remember who kept his enemies afraid." Naomi didn't look away. "And when he does, he'll also remember who let him feel human again." The silence snapped like tension wire. Then, footsteps. Vika paused, spine straightening. Naomi already knew. She didn't turn. She felt it in her bones. Rafe's voice came low, steady from behind them. "This isn't your moment anymore, Vika." Vika exhaled through her nose and turned slowly to face him. He walked into the alley, no coat, breath steaming in the air. His shirt sleeves were rolled, fingers bare. He didn't carry anything but still managed to carry everything. Rafe looked at Naomi first, then back to Vika. "I asked you not to come near her." "She doesn't belong in your world," Vika said. "She's the only real thing I've seen in it." Vika scoffed. "You think love rewrites your history? No. But it makes the future worth living. Rafe stepped forward until there was no space left to hide meaning. "You lost the second you tried to scare her," he said. "That's not power. That's desperation." Vika's jaw clenched. "You're throwing away everything we built, every deal, every name, because a single mother made you soft." "No," Rafe said, "because she reminded me softness isn't weakness. It's strength that doesn't need to scream." The air went still. Naomi didn't speak. Rafe maintained an unreadable expression. Vika's eyes flicked from one to the other. Her lip curled slightly. "You really want this war, cousin?" "I want peace," Rafe replied. "But if you keep pushing, I'll teach you what peace looks like when I'm the one handing it out." Vika gave a faint smile as she backed toward the SUV. "You just declared war, cousin," she whispered. "Let's see how long she lasts." Then she disappeared into the snow. The next time Rafe came to the church, it wasn't through a side door or late at night. It was Saturday morning, sunlight bouncing off half-melted snow piles in the parking lot. Naomi had just finished shoveling the walkway when she looked up and saw him. Walking toward her, coat zipped, hands visible, no shadows in his step. She didn't speak. She opened the door and held it. He nodded once, stepped in, and let the warm air wrap around both of them. Inside, volunteers were restocking canned goods. Millie was running between rows with a glitter-stained paper star. And Rafe? He stood still as if checking if the place would reject him. It didn't. He hung up his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and walked straight to the stack of folding chairs that needed setting out. Naomi watched him from the side hall. Quiet, thoughtful, he was doing what men who knew their own shadows rarely did. He was showing up in daylight. An hour passed. Then, too, he fixed the crooked hinge on the door to the nursery, took apart a space heater and rewired it, organized the pantry like he'd stocked warehouses before, and all without once bringing attention to himself. Naomi handed him a water bottle and leaned on the edge of the counter. "You've a strange way of showing up like you've been here all along." "I've been around broken things for a long time," he said, twisting the cap. "Figured I'd try being around something that runs on people instead of fear." She studied him. "You say things like you've seen too much." He gave a tight smile. "Because the first have." She didn't press, didn't ask for more than he was willing to give. Instead, she gestured toward the main room where Millie was making paper snowflakes. "He made you a star," she said. "I saw," he said, voice softer. "Wasn't sure if it was for me." "It is," she said plainly. "Kids don't complicate things. They feel, they trust, and they choose." Rafe looked down at the bottle in his hands. "Been a long time since I was chosen," Naomi replied. "Then let Millie teach you. Can a child's trust teach a grown man how to feel again? Drop your thoughts in the comments if you've ever been changed by someone small but mighty." Later that afternoon, the church felt warmer than usual. Not because the thermostat worked, Naomi still had to bang it twice to kick in, but because there was laughter in the room. Millie had dragged Rafe to the far end of the hallway to help hang paper angels, and for once, his face wasn't carved from stone. He wasn't smiling wide, but his eyes weren't guarded. He held tape while Millie pointed where each angel should go. She spoke in full run-on sentences, bouncing from one topic to the next, and Rafe never interrupted her once. Naomi leaned on the office door frame, arms crossed, watching them both like she didn't want to blink. "You ever been to a Christmas play?" Millie asked suddenly. Rafe shook his head. "Not in a long time." "I'm in one," Millie said proudly. "I'm a sheep. I've been practicing my ba." "Want to hear?" "Absolutely not," Naomi called out from the other end. Millie grinned. "It's not bad." Rafe raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim." Millie threw his arms up in dramatic protest. "You both don't appreciate theater." Naomi walked over, rubbing his curls as she passed. "He's just looking for an excuse to get you to invite him." Millie gasped. "You want to come?" Rafe looked at Naomi, then back at the boy. "Only if I'm allowed to clap too loud." Millie nodded like he'd been handed the key to the city. "Then you better wear a sweater," Naomi said, moving toward the supply closet. "Because the heat in the sanctuary lies." Rafe followed her with his eyes, something unreadable passing through him. Then he quietly stepped toward her, keeping his voice low. "I don't know what I'm doing here sometimes." She glanced at him. "You mean the church?" He shook his head slightly. "Here, around people like you. I know how to break a thing. I don't know how to be in something that's steady." Naomi didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Nobody knows how to belong. We just learn who's worth showing up for until it starts to feel like home." He looked down, then nodded once. Behind them, Millie started humming a Christmas song, off-key and loud. Rafe chuckled under his breath. It sounded like the start of something real. Rafe's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He stepped away, answered with a quiet, "Yeah." A voice said calmly, "You've got 24 hours to stop, or the church burns." The truck was plain. No markings, no tags, no license plate on the front. It pulled into the alley behind the church late, just after the volunteers left and the sanctuary lights had gone out. Inside were 3 crates, 1 black duffel, and a man with no name written anywhere. He stepped out, gloved hands, tight jaw, moved quick, focused. The order was clear: break in, torch the supplies stacked for Christmas Eve, leave no trail. Not the church, just the back room. A message. He reached for the crowbar. "Don't." The man turned, fast, but not fast enough. Rafe was already standing 5 feet away, but the kind of stillness that makes smart men rethink dumb moves. The man blinked once, his hand lowered. You were just about to steal from children, Rafe said quietly. Wrong street. The man looked past him toward the truck. Rafe didn't move. Leave it. All of it. Look, You don't get a second warning. The man hesitated, then stepped backward. Rafe didn't have to touch him, didn't have to raise his voice. Some reputations speak before fists ever do. The truck pulled off 5 minutes later, empty, slow, gone. The crates stayed behind. Rafe opened them, one by one. Holiday supplies, decorations, food, wrapped gifts labeled for families who wouldn't have any without the church's help. He locked them inside personally, then called no one. No one ever found out. The next morning, Naomi noticed the back storeroom had been reorganized. I thought we left it half unpacked, she told Millie, brow furrowed. Maybe Santa cleaned it? Millie offered, holding up a tinsel string. She chuckled. Maybe, but something in her chest stirred. That afternoon, Rafe was waiting at the front steps before she arrived. You were early, she said. He nodded. Some things needed watching. She paused. Are we in danger? His answer came quiet. Only if I leave. She studied his face. No one ever says that like it means safety. I do. Naomi didn't press him. But the tension in Rafe's shoulders hadn't eased all day. He didn't hover, didn't take control of anything. But she noticed how he scanned every comer of the church as they walked. How he positioned himself near doorways. How he spoke less but stayed longer. By sunset, the Christmas lights had been strung along the sanctuary windows, casting soft color across the wood floors. Millie sat cross-legged near the altar with a clipboard and crayons, rehearsing his sheep lines for the upcoming play. Naomi moved chairs while Rafe watched from the back. You ever stop doing that? She asked without turning. Doing what? Keeping your back against walls. He didn't answer right away. Habit, he said finally. Naomi turned to face him. You trust me? Rafe met her eyes. With everything, then trust this place. Trust that not every corner has someone coming to take. Rafe gave a nod, but his gaze never dropped its edge. That night, Naomi walked Millie home hand in hand through the soft snow. Rafe followed from a distance, never close enough to make it look strange, but near enough that if anyone tried to shift the wind, he'd already be there. When they reached their apartment building, Naomi turned around. He wasn't behind them anymore, but she didn't feel alone. She unlocked the door, helped Millie with his boots, and settled him into bed. An hour later, the hallway was still. Naomi stepped out to check the front mat, expecting maybe another quiet envelope. A note, something left behind without words. But what she saw stopped her cold. A small box sat centered on the welcome mat, wrapped neatly in deep red paper, tied with a black ribbon. She bent slowly, opened it with careful hands. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a single bullet, smooth, clean, polished, and beside it, a folded note with 4 printed words. Pull him back, now. Naomi stared down at the box, her breath low and still. No sound in the hallway. No footsteps. Just silence. And a threat wrapped like a gift. Behind her, the hallway light flickered once. Naomi closed the door without a word, then reached for her phone. She didn't call Rafe. She called the only number he said to use if things got real. The sky over the city carried that soft gray that only came on Christmas Eve. Inside Naomi's apartment, warmth filled the small space. The heater ticked. The scent of cocoa mixed with starch from the ironed shirt she laid beside Millie's costume. Don't wrinkle it, she warned, not turning. Millie stood on a chair, arms out wide, his wool sheep costume drooping on one side. I'm not, he insisted. I'm practicing my ba. It needs chest space. Naomi smiled without showing it. She walked over, clipped the Velcro on his shoulder, and gently tucked the tiny tail back into place. You ready for the big show? Millie beamed. I was born for this role. Pretty sure you were born during a blackout with no hot water, she said, ruffling his hair. Same thing, he grinned. Across town, Rafe stood in the back of the church sanctuary. He watched as the room filled. Families crowding into pews, folding chairs pulled from closets, camera phones ready. Children raced down aisles with angel wings too big and halos made of glitter and pipe cleaners. He didn't move toward the front. He just waited. Until he saw her. Naomi stepped through the side door with Millie in one hand and a plastic bag in the other. Millie broke into a run. He came. I told you he would. Rafe crouched to meet him, his hand pulling something small from his jacket pocket. Hold out your hands. Millie did. Rafe dropped a tiny polished gold bell into his palms. What's this? Stage magic, Rafe said quietly. It'll keep your voice strong. Millie gasped. Is it real? It's yours, Rafe said, but only if you keep it safe. Naomi watched them both. She stepped forward as Millie ran off toward the backstage curtain. Rafe stood. She looked at him. Longer this time. What are you really trying to be? She asked quietly. He held her eyes. Someone worth being pointed at, he said. Naomi didn't speak, but something in her expression shifted. Less guarded, more steady. He was becoming the man no one asked him to be. Just the one he wanted to meet. The sanctuary lights dimmed. A piano note rang out, slightly off. Key but full of effort. Naomi slipped into a seat near the front row, but Rafe stayed in the back, hands clasped. In front of him, gaze locked on the side curtain where Millie waited with the other kids. The narrator began. Lines were recited slowly, some rushed, some whispered. Parents chuckled. Phones rose. Cameras flashed. And then it was Millie's turn. He stepped out, wide-eyed, in his slightly crooked sheep costume, bell proudly hanging around his neck. Rafe didn't move. But Naomi did. She leaned forward just enough to hold her breath. Millie stood there, spotted the crowd, and waved. Hi, Mommy. Laughter broke out. Naomi covered her face, half in joy, half in embarrassment. Then Millie remembered his line and gave the strongest BAA anyone had ever heard from a 5-year-old in corduroy slippers. Rafe smiled. It wasn't full, but it was real. The play continued, full of missed cues and heartfelt moments. An angel tripped. A donkey lost a shoe. But through it all, the warmth never left the room. Naomi glanced back once toward Rafe. He hadn't shifted, but he had changed. When the children took their final bow, Millie searched the crowd. Rafe raised one hand slightly. Just enough. Millie saw him, pointed, and grinned. That was the only applause Rafe needed. As the crowd filed out, Naomi wrapped Millie's coat around him, but something made her pause. The bell. Gone. Her fingers moved fast, checking the collar, his sleeves, his tiny pockets. Millie, she said calmly, where's the bell Mr. Rafe gave you? He blinked. It was on me. I didn't touch it. Naomi crouched, her hands now checking the stage edge, under the pews, between the chairs. Nothing. Behind her, Rafe was already moving. He didn't say a word. He stepped to the edge of the platform, scanned the area, and then turned toward the rear hallway. His entire body had changed. The warmth in his face was gone. His jaw set, shoulders squared. Stay with him, he told Naomi. What's wrong? She asked. Standing. He didn't answer, but his steps were no longer slow. Were sharp, searching, prepared. In the quiet hallway behind the sanctuary, Rafe found the bell, not lost but placed, sitting alone on a windowsill, tied to a black thread. Someone had been watching. Rafe held the bell in his palm. It was still warm, not from Millie's neck, but from someone else's hand. Someone who'd placed it on the windowsill with intention, not by accident. The black thread tied around its loop wasn't ribbon. It was thread used to tag items for sale. Cheap, silent, noticeable only to someone who knew where to look. He scanned the corridor. But the threat was clear. We see you. We can touch what matters. Rafe pocketed the bell, not as evidence but as a reminder. He exited the hallway with the same stillness that made people pause without knowing why. Back inside the sanctuary, Naomi had Millie bundled up and talking to the other parents. But her eyes hadn't stopped searching for Rafe since he left. He approached slowly. Her gaze locked on his. He handed her the bell. "I found it." "Where?" "Doesn't matter." Naomi stared at him. "Rafe." "It was placed." Her throat tightened. "So, they were here." Rafe nodded once. Briefly. She didn't speak for a moment, then asked, "Do we need to run?" He shook his head. "You're not moving again." "Not because of them." Naomi looked down at the bell, now resting in her palm like it had weight far beyond its size. Millie tugged her coat. "Can Mr. Rafe come to the house for Coco?" Rafe crouched beside him. "I've got somewhere to be first. But soon, okay?" Millie grinned. "Okay. But no raisins in the cookies." "Deal." Rafe stood. Naomi walked with him toward the door. "You're going after them, aren't you?" "No," Rafe said quietly. "I'm reminding them I still know how to be who I was." Naomi caught his sleeve. "You promised me you weren't going back." He turned fully to face her. "I'm not. I'm just letting them know the line is drawn, and it's in ice." Naomi's eyes didn't blink. "What if they cross it? Then they break." Rafe walked through the back alley with no coat, only his breath visible in the cold. He didn't call anyone, didn't send a message, just walked. He reached the black sedan parked under a broken streetlight near 5th and Howell. The man inside stepped out before Rafe knocked. "You got the location?" The man nodded, handed him a folded slip of paper. 3 blocks east of the river. Warehouse near the old ferry dock. Same crew Vika's used before. They've been watching from distance. Nothing loud yet. "They touched the church?" "Didn't get that far." "They touched the boy." Silence. Then the man said, "Do you want it cleaned up?" Rafe shook his head. "No mess. No movement. Just eyes on every door she walks through. No one touches them without me knowing first. And Vika, she'll know I know. That's enough for now." The man gave a single nod and returned to the car. Rafe stood in the snow for another full minute, the bell still in his coat pocket, before turning back toward the church. Across town, Naomi placed Millie's bell on their small bookshelf beside the nightlight. She hadn't asked him what happened, not in front of Millie. But now, as the apartment finally went still, she stood at the kitchen counter with both hands flat against the wood. Something had shifted in Rafe. Not back, not forward, but deeper. When the knock came, she didn't jump. She opened the door and found a plain envelope on the mat. No box, no ribbon. Inside, one photo. A grainy street shot of her and Millie walking home 2 nights ago. And written on the back, "Your piece has a price." Because now it wasn't just about the boy. It was about how far they were willing to go, to remind Rafe who he used to be. The next morning, Naomi stepped into the church and found a new note taped to the back of the classroom door. Rafe's handwriting. "They too try one more time. After that they'll stop. I promise you." That night, Naomi lit one candle in the sanctuary after locking up. She turned and saw a shadow move outside the stained glass window watching. But this time, when she stepped outside, no one ran. They were waiting. Naomi stood under the awning, her breath visible, hands calm. The street was still, but the figure across the road didn't move. They weren't here to rush her. They weren't here to scare her. They were here to see if she'd break. She didn't. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the gold bell, held it up in the air. Then she turned her back on them and walked inside.